Good morning again. My name is Angelina Reyes, and I and Dennis Godden, who's around here somewhere, serve as co-presidents of the League of Women Voters for Fremont, Newark, and Union City. Welcome, August 1st. So as a reminder, our restrooms are down the hall and to the left as you leave the sanctuary. We want to thank Niles Discovery Church, Pastor Spencer, and his congregation for the use of this wonderful facility that we've been able to use on the first Saturday of every month for our programs. We're so pleased that you're here today. Thank you. Yes, a round of applause for Pastor Spencer's vision. We're very pleased to have you today. This is a very important presentation. Our program will be recorded and uploaded to our League's website for future viewing. So if you know someone who missed it today, probably by tomorrow, Monday, our website will have the program. A special shout out to Jim Thomas. He's back there. He's our IT technician and is always there for us, including putting on the slides. So thank you, Jim. Just a quick word about the League of Women Voters. As you can see, our mission statement, and we encourage voting and want to inspire our voters to actually go out and vote or fill out those ballots and mail them in early. So this is our League's mission. The League is over 100 years old, and this League is over 50 years old. So we've been working very hard for our communities and supporting the issues that impact our democracy. Next slide. Just to let you know that this organization is strictly nonpartisan. The League of Women Voters never, sorry, it goes too fast for me. One more. Okay. It never endorses or opposes a particular candidate or political party. Once individuals are elected, they are no longer candidates. They become our public servants, and they are responsible for representing us, regardless of party affiliation. Holding elected officials accountable to the public interest is not a partisan act. It is a vital function for a healthy democracy. And last one. So we are neutral in every respect, and we do advocate for things that we are so proud to place a position on. Now, with the general election coming on November 3rd, it's just 95 days away. We encourage you to get involved with our League to help our educators to learn about the state propositions, to inspire them to vote. And we also will need any assistance, any volunteers to help us with our pros and cons presentation, as well as candidates forums for our 3 mayoral, council, and school board elections. That would be 6 forums: a school board forum, a city council forum, as well as mayor, if there's a mayor running in the 3 cities of Fremont, Newark, and Union City. So we need your help. And you can see our Vice President, Anna Jacoby, who has been working hard to already schedule some of these candidates forums. So we welcome your help. And at this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Jane Mueller, our League member. She is the lead and instrumental in developing today's program. We thank her for that. You know, Jane joined the League at an early age, but through the years, she has served in various leadership positions. Today, she is an advocate for co-housing and good government. And recently, our board was really working hard in regards to the recent Fremont charter proposal. and we were like worker bees, just getting everything done that we wanted to present at the council meeting. And Jane was very instrumental in assisting us. And we appreciate her unwavering dedication to maintaining transparency in government. So thank you, Jane. Onward.
My goodness, I didn't expect all that. So this morning we are going to handle this as a conversation with Judge Jeremiah Johnson. He is the Executive Vice President of the National Association of Immigration Judges. He was appointed an immigration judge by Attorney General Jeff Sessions during the first Trump administration, and he was a judge for 8 years until last November when all of a sudden he was fired. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone here.
So there's so many questions to ask you. The first thing I want to start with is immigration courts themselves, because I think it's important to make the point that they are not part of the judiciary. They're part of the executive branch. So what are the immigration courts charged with accomplishing?
Right, and so immigration courts, as you mentioned, are not what we consider. There's 3 branches of government, the legislative, executive, and judicial. And so most people think of courts in the judicial branch, Article 3 of the Constitution. Initially, or originally, immigration fell under the Department of Treasury back a long time ago, and then it moved over into the Department of Justice, and that's when they had special inquiry officers to determine whether or not a person could enter the United States, and that transformed ultimately into the 1940s and 50s into what we now have an immigration court system. And the immigration court was recognized to be separate and needed to have an independence to make those decisions, but was not established as an independent court. Rather, they put it in the Department of Justice, and the Immigration National INS was in a separate bureaucratic firewall that they separated the two. That has since now become the Department of Homeland Security, but the immigration courts have remained inside the Department of Justice. And immigration courts are responsible to determine who may remain in the United States and who is removed from the United States. Immigration judges, under the law that Congress passed, which is called the Immigration and Nationality Act, says that every person in the United States, if they're to be removed, has a right for a removal proceedings. This is a proceeding, and an immigration judge shall administer or shall oversee that proceedings. So immigration judges are responsible to determine if a person's removable, and that's inadmissibility or deportability. These are legal terms. And it's not quite so simple sometimes as how did they cross the border, but sometimes you have people overstaying visa, people make claims to U.S. citizenship. So these are these courts that are set up throughout the country that are overseen by the Attorney General, who answers to the President of the United States. And they look like every other court that you would imagine. They have dioceses, judges wear robes, there's attorneys and parties appearing before them. And you make those decisions, whether a person is removable, can they be removed, and then what type of relief are they seeking. The majority of cases that I've heard, and most immigration judges here, are asylum cases, but many are also people who've been in the United States for a long time. Over 10 years without status, there's a possibility of showing a level of hardship to certain family members, but then also people who have their residency, or what we call the green card, have committed certain crimes, and that would subject them to removable as well. So it's basically, the law says this is the only way to remove someone from the United States. There's something called expedited removal and another thing when if it's kind of technical, but by and large, Congress said removal proceedings are how you remove someone from the United States, and immigration judges have to conduct that hearing.
So what did it mean to you to be an immigration judge?
I think of the word awesome, and I don't know if I'm a product of growing up in the early 80s or if that's the right word in some of the terminology. And it's not an awesome in that 80s sense, but when you look at the word awesome as far as wonderment and responsibility, I recall it's a merit service. You have to apply for the position. It's not one that you're appointed to. You're appointed by the Attorney General, but you apply, resume, interviews. And the final interview that I went was in D.C. And, well, at first, a friend of mine who, I think she was a judge at the time or not, but she's like, you should apply to be a judge. I'm like, I don't want to be a judge. I cannot deport someone. I didn't think I could do that. I was an advocate for a number of years. I had become an asylum officer, but could I look someone in the eye and order them removed from the United States? And I wasn't at that space that I could do that. And that's where this awesomeness comes into it, where I was a real big proponent, and I still am, of the rule of law. And at Maine DOJ, in DC, was my final interview with the director and some other people. And that, I think, was a concern for them. That came up. And like, can you order someone removed? And I had to think about that, not at the moment, because I knew that was a question coming up. And I could. And so that awesomeness where you're able to explain to someone else, and these people, most of the asylum seekers are coming from countries where they're not heard, to be able to promote the rule of law in a way that someone can walk out of my courtroom and say, you know what, in America, judges listen to people. In America, they heard my voice. I'm able to speak, present evidence. That was very important to me, and that's where I think being a judge was so important, and that's what I enjoyed about it. It wasn't the granting or denial in either aspect, to look someone and to have that connection with the person. I was recently at the American Bar Association in Chicago, and someone was telling me, a former judge, when you order someone removed, like, it is painful to have to do that, but to balance your feelings and also to follow the law and to make that choice over the law, but then recognizing it, that was something very, I feel, privileged almost in a way, to be able to experience that shared humanity in a courtroom in that type of sense.
So take us through what happened the day you were fired.
Do you want the long version or the short version? I say that because I'll go the long version, and feel free to fast forward or
I really want to know.
I mean, and this will give you a little background of what it was like these last months at the court. Judges, we were always, from day one when I was on the bench, there's a tremendous backlog. The work is tremendous, is emotional at times. There's always a time to move forward. But the last several months, I used to hear 3 cases a day. They added an additional 3 detained cases every day that I had to hear now 6 cases. And they're detained, and you're moving forward at a pace. And so I was waking up early. I was stressed. So I came into court on a Friday morning, and I found out that none of my detained cases were going forward that day. Sometimes it just happens that they fall off the calendar. And so this was great. I had a master calendar hearing, which are these preliminary hearings, which you would think of like arraignments, where people would plead guilty or not guilty, but you plead to, am I removable or I'm not, I'm seeking relief. You look at are their applications filled out completely, ready to go, and can you set it? I enjoyed that. It was an opportunity for me to be a little bit more folksy, for lack of a better word, to chat with the different attorneys, to get to know them. It was a way, because court can be scary. Court can be, you're nervous as a young attorney to go in front of judges. Imagine if your life depends on this. And I wanted people to come back to court. I wanted them to say, I want to be in front of this judge. This judge will listen. So I enjoyed meeting people and talking to them in a way that was not so consequential, where we were making those really difficult decisions. Most of the people did not have attorneys. I would usually, because we were moving along so quickly, I had been telling attorneys to submit everything in writing. I don't need to see you today, just move things along. People had their applications for asylum in order, ready to go, and then the government attorney, has a motion, said, Your Honor, we moved to pre-termit, which means let's deny the asylum application without a hearing. We have this asylum cooperative agreement, an ACA. This person may be from Mexico, but we don't want to send her to Mexico. We have this agreement. The government of the United States has an agreement with Honduras. We're going to send her to Honduras. So we don't even need a hearing on this. Well, you make a motion, they get 10 days, and there's been this fight about, judges having pressure to just move forward or pre-termit to deny cases without hearings. But I gave the lady time they had the documents, the government had everything in writing, and everything was going well. The attorney was, making their case. I gave them more time to respond. I set it for months out, and, moved through the day, made it to lunch. I was like, wow, it's a good day. I looked at my afternoon calendar. I'm like, I'm just one case. Went out to have a chai latte. I never have, it's like, I'm going to have a chai latte. I found $1 on the street. I was like, yes. I was like, this is the best day ever. Someone calls me, another judge, and this is also what I was going through. I was, as the vice president of the National Association of Immigration Judges, I talked to judges around the country. She had a reasonable accommodation to hear cases remotely. She didn't come into the court. She could do it remotely. Attorneys could do it remotely. They were canceling everyone's reasonable accommodation, judges' reasonable accommodation, so I was helping her what recourses she could have and talking through her that. At the same time, they were promoting advertisement to hire new judges that you could work remotely. So they're taking experienced judges' reasonable accommodations away and providing new judges signing bonuses and remote work. But then I went into my afternoon hearing. I knew the case was of a family of 4 from Guatemala, indigenous Mayan mom. My interpreter was this interpreter who does a splendid, amazing job, so I didn't need a relay. So sometimes, in court, why does it take so long? English to Spanish, Spanish to mom, mom to Spanish, Spanish to English. So you have to wait each one of those and to give that narrative back and forth. So these are skills judging that you learned, and I enjoyed that process. I knew case law supported their claim. The Ninth Circuit, and the number of circuit cases and the history of Guatemala, I was quite familiar in the 80s, and the genocide and the government's persecution towards indigenous persons can manifest more recently in terms of race violence and those things. I granted the case for asylum after relatively short hearing. The Department of Homeland Security was the same attorney, didn't have many questions. She waived appeal, meaning the decision was final, which is always a good thing, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time. My last words on the bench were, you've been granted asylum to the United States. That decision is final. Welcome to the United States. Their children were there. Normally, I leave that up to the parents, whether they want their children to be present or not. It's their lives, the decisions. They may speak about things that are difficult, but that's a parental decision, not mine so much. And so everyone was doing well. I learned that my ACIJ, which is Assistant Chief Immigration Judge, so I have a supervisor. So talking about what courts are, we are bureaucracies. So immigration judges report to an ACIJ, Assistant Chief Immigration Judge, who reports to the Regional Deputy Chief Immigration Judge, who reports to the Chief Immigration Judge, who reports to the Deputy Director, who reports to the Director, who reports to the Deputy Attorney General, who reports to the Attorney General, and then they go to the President. So this is a long line of policy and bureaucracy versus the judge should just, set their case and hear them. So our ACIJ judge had been fired in September, I believe, and so we're now in November. The judge in Concord, who's the supervising judge, she was acting ACIJ, so she was in town. I knew her. She was a judge on the 4th floor where my chambers were, so I go up to, FaceTime, because that's why I not talk to be in person. I go up on the 9th floor to see her. She's not in, but I start talking to other judges. It's a Friday afternoon. Everyone's doing great. We're talking case law. We're talking things. I go see another judge in her chambers, and we're chit-chatting. My voice is probably carrying a little bit too much. I'm probably laughing a little bit too much, and I hear, Judge Johnson, is that you? And so she comes in, and we start talking, and I remember another judge, the other judge who we were with, what are you doing here? You're here to just fire us all, right? And we're like, ha ha ha, not if I have anything to do with it. And I'm like, oh, sure enough. I'm like, trust me, you don't have anything to do with that. And we start talking about how can we be more efficient? How can we handle our dockets? Another judge walks by, or a supervising legal assistant comes through, our doors open, and says, Chen and Savage have been fired, and referencing two other judges, Immigration Judge Chen and Judge Savage. And so we all looked at each other in shock and dismay. Over, I think, 80 judges has been fired by that time. And being part of the National Association of Immigration Judges, I was privy to a lot of those, of what happened and what behind the scenes. So I was familiar with those letters and everything. The other judge who I was with, she went to go, I said, you go say goodbye to Judge Chen. I'll say goodbye to Judge Savage. We have resources to provide, their colleagues and friends. Made my way to my own chambers because everyone's talking and hearing there's perhaps other judges have been fired. And so this was also why I was having such a great day. I left my cell phone in chambers. Like I'm just not connected, just talking to people. And I get downstairs and I look at my phone and I can see it's lots of messaging. I send a note to our board members of NIJ who were all colleagues and confirming that judges were being fired in San Francisco. And so I decided to, log in on my computer. We have to, and I see the Outlook. I'm like, well, I should look to see if I got an email. That's how it's delivered. And sure enough, a subject line termination, I believe, and opened up the PDF. And I don't recall really reading it. I think at this point, I called my wife and just told her, hey, Judges Chen and Savage been fired and more, and myself included. And then I couldn't print the letter. I was locked out of the system by the time, like within 30 seconds, it was all, are you fired? And I'm like, I think so. Can you check the printer? It's like, no, hold on. And so I packed up, I turned the radio on. Some friends came, helped me pack up, and escorted out of the building later on. Went back and got my stuff. I ride my bike to work, so I had to leave many judges at this time, like what it was like as well, the stress. And it's like Judge Savage had months before had packed up his entire courtroom. So everything were in duffel bags that he had already taken out. And he, that's why I went to say goodbye to him. He's a former Marine. He was efficient. He's, it hurts, but he's, grabbed his backpack. He's out the door. Others were not so. I had a full chambers that I had a lot of art on the wall, music and stuff. And I was sort of like, all right, so packed up and then made my way home. And yeah. So that's the last day. And then what I found, I forgot about. And then I watched a movie. I was like, if anyone's ever seen, what's that? The movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it was all about the immigration, a Fine Battle or whatever, the one with him and Sean Penn, who won the Oscar recently. So then we just like, let's just watch a movie. And then I'm watching it. I'm like, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a little too stressful of a day to watch this movie. So,
no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, so
that's the day.
The San Francisco court closed May 1st.
Yes.
And you mentioned it was being an officer of the National Association of Immigration Judges. You have, I think, maybe a more global view of the context of all of this. So talk to us a little bit about the impact of what's going on in terms of immigrants seeking asylum and due process issues and the objectivity of judges. Right.
I mean, all three of them are connected. So as far as the people appearing before the court, it's just added delay. So any suggestion that there's not going to be a delay because the cases are being transferred to Concord, we can hear a case remotely from anywhere. I push back on that. And experienced judges know how to handle courtrooms. Experienced judges can have hearings. Concord was created in response to too many cases in San Francisco. It was a way to relieve some of the backlog. And I think they have space for 20, 21, 24, somewhere around there, capacity, the same as what San Francisco had. Concord has, I think, 4 or 5 judges, 5 judges perhaps. A judge was just fired a couple weeks ago, I think. So that is at a delay. Staff has to pack, transfer. All of this is extra resources. People are going to be waiting longer. What it means for due process, your case taking longer, it's not necessarily true, and it may be true sometimes, but you want to have your case heard sooner rather than later. People do not want to remain in a legal limbo, especially now. People want to have a fair hearing. Their witnesses, their declarations, payments to attorneys. People want to move forward in their lives. And so you might not have, or you may be ready to go to court in a week, and next thing you know, no judges. And so you're emotionally prepared for this, you're intellectually prepared, you're working with your attorney, you're getting all that day, and your next hearing is now years from now. So there's going to be a lot of people waiting. Annual fees increase, they're making it even more difficult to wait, not only just the procedural barriers about having to renew your work permits, having to renew all of the paperwork, but also the fear that's in the community. The fear of having to go to your doctor's appointment, to go to the softball league or the church, whatever, your family. They are members of our community. Whatever status it is, they're still your neighbors, your friends. They may even be your college professors that you don't know were in removal proceedings. As an attorney, I've worked with people who are not the stereotypical, like what you would think someone would be in proceedings. And that is done by design as well, to that fear, and we can talk more about that, and then the chilling effect on independence of immigration judges, these firings across the country and in San Francisco. It does send a message to immigration judges. You're being fired, you see your colleagues fired for no reason, no cause given. So you don't know, am I doing something correctly? Am I not doing something correctly? There was never any messaging or never any statements from your supervisor, that long ACIJ and all that through, saying, Judge Johnson, you're not really working out here. You're not a good fit. Here's the problem. Or, there's none of that. So judges who remain on the bench are maybe left wondering, what am I doing right or what am I not doing right? And judges were then listening to the rhetoric, the culture of moving things forward and stuff. And so you have that soft pressure on judges not to have hearings, because we saw that in this administration. In April, the president said, we cannot have hearings for all the people that are entitled to it. It was a press statement he said to the press when he was getting on a plane. Well, the law, we go back to what we said in the beginning in the Act in 240. Every person has a right to have proceedings. That removal proceedings is what Congress said, this is how you remove people. And the president said, well, we just don't have enough time to do that for all of these people. Not everyone's going to get that hearing. So who doesn't get the hearing, or that full and fair hearing? Because due process, to me, there's some judges are really intellectual and like regs and have it all down and academic. That's my thought of due process, is a full and fair hearing. I was told to get it right, to make sure, do it once, get it right, full and fair, let people have their voice heard. If you fire a judge, you don't have a hearing in front of that judge. Your hearing was canceled. No hearing. If you arrest people as they're coming to court, they don't have a hearing that day. They go into detention. That sends a chilling effect. We've seen people not showing up to courts because they're fearful of getting arrested. Orders of removal in absentia, people not appearing. So there are no hearings. There's a short hearing, but it's not a full and fair hearing. So all of those orders of removal. People in detention, I've had cases where I sat down, I was prepared to, I think, grant the case, listen to the case at least. They had a viable claim. They came to the United States lawfully at the border. They've been in detention 8 months, and the first thing she told me was, I cannot take another day in a detention. I cannot do this. I want to be ordered removed. So people are withdrawing their applications, their rights to seek relief, who had entered the United States lawfully, placed in this detention facility, and could not take another day. And so that's no hearing. So this is by design. This, detention is a legal strategy for no more hearings. Pre-termission is what we were talking about, that asylum cooperative agreement. Oh, we can have a hearing about your fear of removing to Honduras, but I'm from Mexico. Well, our hearing then will be very short because you've never been to Honduras, you don't have evidence to present, you might not. I mean, lawyers are fighting, but people are like, you can have that hearing, but the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the binding precedent above us, we have an appellate body of, they're also under the executive branch. They said you could do it in a very short hearing and in a master hearing, deny those cases. Perhaps you don't fill out your form correctly. Every dotted or I dotted, and every answer, instead of an NA, you just leave it blank. Well, the board says you can deny that case as well. No hearing. You didn't pay your fee in time. You can deny that case. No hearing. These are all ways to not have hearings. And so that's the effect that you see, starting with judges being fired. Now as a judge, you get those motions in front of you. Are you going to have a full, fair hearing? Knowing very well that you may be fired. Your job is on the line. And judges are, even though we are, you're seeing that, I do want to say that judges are still having full and fair hearings. There are judges on the bench who are struggling with this every day. Working conditions are incredibly difficult. And as the vice president of NIJ, you hear of the stories of judges. How am I going to handle that? Just like in November, we were experiencing that stress, but we were trying to figure out ways to do it. Now, there's not training, there's not experience. It's just a gutting of the entire court system itself, not just San Francisco.
I think you mentioned to me when we were talking beforehand that Congress has authorized funding for 800 judges?
I believe it was 800. It might be 700. No, 800. Yeah, I think it was recently 800. So Congress initially, last Congress initiated or funded more judges. You do see a hiring of new judges.
But we're not at the 800 level.
I don't think so. I don't see the exact numbers because we lost 120-ish, I'm thinking. It could be, I saw reports at 130, but that might be including the appellate immigration judges. They were fired as well. Directors were fired. People also, this was a period of time, did we talk about, or the Doge and removing. So people saw the writing and they took the deferred retirement. They left. People left the court, left the government. Good people were forced out. But if you compare that to the 70 billion, or I'm not sure the amount that ICE is funded or DHS is funded. So you're putting so much money into enforcement and so little resources in the court system that Congress said this is how you remove people. So if you truly do wish to remove people from the United States, and going back to how I believe the rule of law, and how do you do that? You do it how Congress told us to do it. And we can have debates on how open the border, how humanitarian you want to be or not. And so this is not a policy of being granting asylum or denying asylum or being too liberal or too. This is what Congress said. These are rules, and as a judge we follow the law. And so if this is the way to do it, to give a full and fair hearing, it should be funded as such. You can't have enforcement throw all, dump everything into this, and you have the funnel being choked that can't hear cases in an expeditious way.
Why do you think you were chosen for this treatment?
I think I'm an experienced immigration judge. We have, no one's been told why. You had to think about why. I think at times, or now even sooner, there's a strategy here. I do think that. I know judges who had been fired just Thursday. 3 judges were fired. 1 in Sacramento and 2 in Chicago. The 2 in Chicago, and then before that, a week before, a judge in Boston was fired. And she had been on the bench for 17 years, federal service 33 years or something. She called me, she's like, I've handled 1,400 cases already this year. So judges are trying their best, but somehow she was on a list somewhere. I think there's a strategy that, I wasn't appointed under Biden, I was appointed under Trump 1. San Francisco, I think, was a message. It's a way to keep judges who are on the bench, who are coming onto the bench, to try to influence them. If we can take down a court in San Francisco, we can take down courts everywhere if we can fire these judges. And so I think it's a strategy to fire experienced judges, to send a message to judges. San Francisco is a liberal city, progressive city. That's what it stands for, right? And so there are certain messaging that this administration wants to send out rather than actually be thoughtful in the way that they implement certain programs. So I think it was, if you just, we've got rid of the San Francisco court. and they'll say, well, we did it because there's a cost saving. I'm like, yes, because you fired every single judge there, save but 2. So yes, it does make sense not to have a vacant courthouse in San Francisco.
So get out your crystal ball and tell us, where do you think this is all headed?
I'm an optimist, so events like this, people are voting, people are seeing what's happened. I don't pretend that things are not going to, still can get worse. They certainly can. The day I was fired, I remember us talking after 2 other judges were fired, and before I had learned, I was like, we looked at each other, I thought the firings were over, right? It's like, message understood, 80 judges fired, got it, I understand. But no, and so every month, new judges are being fired, and so you're like, there's still, I think it's an attempt to replace the immigration court and the new judges, not to say that they're not qualified in a sense, any judge can, there are you're a lawyer, you can learn it, there's smart people, but you don't have the experience and the mentorship to train. They've gutted the training programs that I went to. They're not the same. The everything, it's just a gutting of the system. You lose that institutional knowledge, and it's not just in the immigration court system. You have it in many federal agencies in the Department of Justice itself. You don't have civil servants who are there to lead. So, it's going to continue. It's not going to be great. Immigrants have always been, the scapegoat, right? And always people with less power. You have racism. You have xenophobia. You have those things at play. So this is a vulnerable population to target to see what you can get away with. And if you can now, I can fire immigration court systems and manipulate that. Can I do the same with veterans benefits or Social Security courts, because they're administrative law courts? Like, where can I exert executive authority? And this goes into the policy talk a little bit more than just, but where can I? Because we were fired with a statement that says, pursuant to Article 2 of the Constitution, the president has decided, or the Attorney General exercising Article 2. Has decided to remove you, and have given no cause other than Article 2, which is gives the authority of the president, the executive branch. That's Article 2 of the Constitution. And so under that theory, and a number of judges have challenged their removal, either through the Merit Service Board, like myself, who said, I'm a civil servant, you should have told me what I did so I can respond. To others who have said, I was fired because of gender or race. And the defense is, no, we're the executive. And you see this in the Slaughter case. You see this playing out in the Supreme Court with the Fed governor who was fired and other people. So it is still being worked out. Like, what authority does the president have? And under this defense, could it be race? I'm going to fire you because of race. Article 2 of the Constitution says I don't have to give a reason. I just can just write that letter and do it. And their defense is, president has that power. Not to say, no, I didn't do it because of race or gender or this other protected ground. They won't even answer that. Or to give, we could talk about like some examples. So I do think, and I'm probably straight to, so, where does it go from now? We're in challenging times, and not everyone in my circles are confident that the Supreme Court is going to issue decisions that are going to support the rule of law or how they believe the rule of law is, but I still have confidence. I think that there is going to be some guardrail. There is an expansion of executive powers that we're seeing here in the United States and around the world, but I think I think our Constitution will place some guardrails on it, whether it's the ones that we think are robust enough in the immigration space, I'm not sure, but I still hold out hope.
So I think it would be interesting for people to know what you have been doing since last November.
Absolutely. So I have, back to that day, fired and, watched the movie. Then, of course, the next day you go for a dog walk. You walk with your wife. And I looked through my notes. I keep journals and notes and whatnot. And I was like, I think it was the next day. Or even that night. My wife's like, oh, you should write a book. It's like, who would want to read a book about this? This is, no. But what I was, what opportunity of writing myself in journals and books and things like that nature, I read about I read nonfiction, I read, interwar mountain explorers from the 1920s who are, expeditions and things like that. The golden age of exploration and that. But I also started thinking about what is next, and I had never been to the southern border. I'm an immigration attorney for years. I was an asylum officer who I purposely did not want to go to Dilley at the time, which is at the southern border. Families and children were being detained. Working with children, it takes a little bit more emotional context that I wasn't ready for. So I used to work a lot with criminals, and I could understand that process and talk to them. And not be so invested. So I went to the southern border. I never had been. I walked along the wall, talked to Border Patrol, drove around with retired Border Patrol. I dropped water off in the desert for migrants crossing. I went into Mexico, went to shelters that years ago would have been full of families heading north, but now I'm having lunch with people who had just been deported. Who had just been in alligator Alcatraz, and we're sitting down having lunch together trying to figure out what's next. And I'm not in that courtroom. When everyone came to me, and so this is where that process was for me. People come to me, traveled thousands of miles to get there, to be in front of me in this courtroom, and I held a certain space. I was in control. It was kind of like my house, right? My rules. They had to conform and try to get asylum. There is a narrative there, and there are some books out there and essays that are wonderfully talking about the narrative that asylum seekers and refugees have to manufacture or present. Not that it's a manufacturing, but there's a way that Western and societies and us, the refugee and the rights, and we want to hear a certain narrative. Anyway, what is it when I go to those places where I'm no longer in charge, right? And I'm not the one that have a courtroom. I'm the one that's vulnerable to the weather, to the Border Patrol people, to the desert. People were even asking, and then I went into Tapachula, Mexico, which is the border between Guatemala and Mexico. And this is the main border crossing for people coming north from Central America, but also from India, Nepal. They come into South America and head north, and then Tapachula, Mexico is the main entryway. You can go through the mountains or the water. And this is all what I've been doing. I've been learning about migration patterns from people like, how do you get this way? And how do you navigate that system when you're, 6'2" white guy that stands out in a crowd and my Spanish is horrible. And what am I, the person that's not familiar with an escalator, an elevator, or like how to work the bus system or the BART system to go into the city? So now I'm having to navigate these things that are new. And what's that like for me to experience that? So I was placing myself in that moment to see what it would be like. And so I did end up Mexico. I was deported. We talked about these third country removals, where we can't remove you to your own country because you have withholding of removal, or so we think it's more likely than not you would be tortured if we send you to Cuba at this moment. And the law a judge found that out. So we'll send you to Mexico. Mexico then has you stuck in Tapachula because you can't move anywhere else. So I was with many Cubans there, Haitians. We were part of a caravan for briefly. I saw them head north to Mexico City, and I then continued south and made my way into Guatemalan highlands from the same village of this town, from the family that I had met on the last day that I was at the bench. So I made it into their village and met their parents and experienced their hospitality. And then I've been coming to events like that, and then I made it home and looking for a job and reading books and stuff like that. And
you
talking.
flew back from Chicago yesterday,
Yeah, which was
where you had been at the American Bar Association and received the Justice and Rule of Law Award.
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Association, this is so kudos to them. The National Association of Immigration Judges was awarded the ABA, the American Bar Association Judicial Division, Justice and Rule of Law Award. It's a very prestigious award. It was named after John Marshall originally, and then they changed the name for reasons. Other winners are, Sandra Day O'Connor, certain senator. I mean, it's the league. The women judges won the award. So it was an amazing, and for the National Association of Immigration Judges to do this, to me, is a testament to, or maybe is a hope of my optimism, because it is such a I use the word scrappy organization, right? So when I first took the bench, we had an in-person meeting, all judges. There was a forum that the NIJ, we were a union, a labor union. We had collective bargaining rights. If your ACIJ had a complaint, you were allowed to come in with your union representative and talk about it. You could file a grievance because, they're not allowing me reasonable accommodations against the government. Officers were allowed official time that they actually had, I read they had a filing cabinet that they were allowed in their office to use for union activity. Under Trump 1, we were decertified as a union, so we're no longer a labor union, but we are still affiliated with the IFPTE, which is an international labor union of NASA scientists, other administrative law judges. So we're in good company. We have no collective bargaining rights. We're losing members, and so that traditional way of taking dues out of your paycheck are no longer available to us, so trying to, on a shoestring budget, we have a gag order in place that said immigration judges would not be able to come out, sitting judges would not be able to come out and speak to events like this. Not to just necessarily, of course, we're not going to, badmouth the administration, but even if you wanted to know about immigration law, why couldn't an immigration judge come speak? But there was a gag policy. So NIJ, under the the Knight Foundation also, we have a lawsuit against our agency on our free speech rights, and that went to the Supreme Court on a procedural thing. It's now in the Fourth Circuit, So we are scrapping, we're fighting. We now have and had introduced a bill in Congress with Representative Zoe Lofgren here. So she is, for a number of times, or I think 3 times I've done it, but maybe this is only twice. In current Congress is the Rule of Law, Real Courts Act, or Real Court Rule of Law Act, that would take the immigration court out of the executive, out of Article 2, and establish an independent immigration court. It would be called Article 1 court, similar to a tax court, what you see tax judges. And so the structure, it's very modeled after the tax court. And Congress creates that. And so we were instrumental. We went to D.C. What else I was doing? I went to Washington, D.C. and to lobby on behalf of Article 1. Senator Gillibrand just introduced it, I believe, last week. So this, I think, is the first time that it's been in both the House and the Senate. And so when you're a scrappy organization working on good governance programs, and when you're working on good things, it takes a long time. It takes many years, even generations, to have these things come through. So this little step, and we even had our lobbyist, who's a realist in DC, would tell us, it's never going to pass, never. And finally, I think at our last meeting, he's like, you never know. It might actually pass. And this, he's like a curmudgeon of a realist of a guy. He's a great guy. And we're like, and I start cracking up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, did you just say that it could? And he's like, well, it could, and he's like, he had the theory about how it could come certain scenarios that could come out. It's not a very high percentage, but these acts, these things. And so, do I have hope? Yes. Is things going to be better in tomorrow? Probably not. But going to universities, going to events like this, going to talk to kids' school. I mean, I think going to the border, one of the things also was to see, I was having one of the meaningful times, or two events that were so meaningful, where one was just having some beers in Arivaca, which is a small town right on the border. Ranchers, artists, do-gooders. But we're all sitting around listening to music, and I'm sure many of them did not have the same view of political views that I did. But we all agreed that people shouldn't be dying out on the desert. And we all agreed that what we saw was happening in Minnesota, that's not right. And so you're able to sit down in a person-to-person and have discussions with people. And so that was one of the things, was to go out of my comfort zone and meet that, and to see if I still had faith in because you can be a little down at times reading the news, but then also, when it's you getting fired, you get down, you're like, wait, this isn't the greatest thing. And they're like, where are we going? But getting in the rental car and going out and down to Arivaca is a great, beautiful little, if anyone's into birding, it's a beautiful area to go watch birds. They have a refuge and stuff, or if you want to go and just observe the wall, take binoculars and a bird book and tell Border Patrol you're birding, and they'll let you go.
Well, speaking of scrappy organizations, the League of Women Voters is pretty scrappy.
Yeah, I love it.
And I can almost see people shifting in their seats going, this isn't right. What do we do to change this? What can people like us do to influence the direction things go, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's many things they can do. I mean, you go from the big level, talk to your Congress people about supporting an Article 1 bill, right? That's this law. That would be very important to NIJ and the rule of law and due process. It's not going to solve everything, right? It's not going to solve immigration policy and cruelty and all that. So other ways to do that are, you can even be just nice to people. I think that actually helps as well. And to go have those discussions with people that you don't agree with. Those are important to have as well. But also, there was a New York Times, I think, op-ed, or letter to the editor about in Minnesota, the minivans, like this lady's like, what did we do? They drove kids to school because the parents were not able to go on the streets. And it's those little acts. So any little small thing is enough. And when I speak to, maybe, I'm not sure I've honed in the message correctly yet. I'm still new at this public speaking. But talking to law students and other young people, I tell them, you're not going to change the world. They tell you that. It's not going to happen. But what you can do is change your space around you, that interactions, and affect other people. It may not be top news press and get the law passed. It might not be an impact litigator. I have friends who are at the ACLU, all these other organizations that are doing amazing work. It may not even be filing habeas petitions that as a lawyer you can do. It may be taking groceries to someone. It may be nice to your neighbors. Putting that faith back in humanity, that humanity back in humanity, right? That I think is missing in some of today's, and this is just me being joking about it, I don't know, but that's sometimes missing. And so what can you do is just, be nice to each other. And I think that, it might be simple, but it seems to be good advice.
Sometimes simple
right.
is exactly right. I think some people must be itching to ask you questions.
Absolutely.
And we have a couple of microphones here and a couple of people willing to yield them. So if you will signal to Anna and Andrea if you would like to ask a question, they'll bring you a microphone.
Hello?
After-
Hello?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Alex Starr, and boy, this is wonderful to see this place almost full. I have a kind of a slightly different take on this. What is the makeup currently of the immigration judge population? Is it all male, half and half, male, female? Are there any people who have come to this country, immigrated to this country, also now immigration judges?
I don't know the exact makeup. I wouldn't have the stats, but I do know our bench. It was represented male, female. I didn't notice anything otherwise. You have now a hiring trend more on people with government or prosecutorial background. And earlier, the bench was made up of mostly people from Department of Homeland Security with a prosecutorial background. And then there was a switch to people that had more advocate rights or an attorney in that position. I noticed, and this is not, I have no data on this, but I noticed that women are more representative in those roles of immigration attorneys, asylum work, that type of work. There are certainly immigrants themselves who have been on the bench, and so they are represented as well. So I think it is a fairly diverse population. Veterans, it's a government position. So you have a lot of veterans, military, and there's bios on all the new judges or all the judges. They have their background biographic. But San Francisco and Concord and Boston, I think it was a fairly well represented. I think there were more women judges in San Francisco than men judges, I'm pretty sure. I mean, the dean, what we call it, the dean of the immigration court, at least in San Francisco, maybe not, was from Mill Valley, Judge Dana Lee Marks. She argued the seminal case, Cardoza v. Fonseca, in front of the Supreme Court, the asylum case and she had us all under her wings in San Francisco, mentored us. So I think it's pretty representative.
Yeah, would the immigration bill that was about to be passed by both parties that they ironed out several years ago, would that have solved some of the problems? Remember, there was an immigration bill.
Like the comprehensive immigration reform bill that was
Yes,
probably
yeah.
like 10 years ago or so, or no?
Oh, I think it was more recently, 4 or 5 years ago.
See, I don't know. There's a number of bills, and I'm what we're seeing now as well is also a limitation and an attack on, I think, even on legal immigration. So you have increased fees, increased difficulties of H-1B. So I think it's more of a cultural response or attack to immigration itself. Would it have solved it, years ago? Not necessarily, because, then would you have had this response to immigration as a political discussion or a political point? It would have certainly helped. 1996 was the last time there was a major immigration bill or a law, and that has actually caused a lot of problems, and they're doing an exploration of that bill. Was signed by President Clinton, Newt Gingrich, all of them brought it through, but that criminalized a lot of what we saw. And so when people say, how can they arrest immigrants? Like, isn't there anything? No, 1996 we passed that law. All these people, ICE can go and arrest people. They don't need a judicial warrant, right? We passed that law in 96, 97 as part of our reform because we were going to get tough on crime. People who are being deported, removed because of a 20-year-old petty theft, or not petty, there's a petty theft exception, but because of a drug crime 20 years ago, a minor drug crime. We passed that law in 96 to make that. Mandatory detention, 236C. We passed that law in 1996. So all of this is stemming from that law, or a lot of it is. Militarization of the border. People were not dying at the border en masse that we see now. There's a funneling to certain points into the border to militarize and build that wall and those checkpoints. So making it more difficult. And so those are some of those reasons. So they're not addressing the human factors. And then what you also saw well, I forget, but this is a creation that we created in 1996 and beyond in our laws, and so I think there needs to be even something more fundamental. You know, DACA would certainly help. Appointing counsel, you know, some of these things we can address that are political viable, but I think they're being scuttled by a strong minority group.
Hi, thank you for being here today. I was just going to ask you, because I'm getting this impression that you were collateral damage to a different immigration policy or an evolving one. Is that a pretty accurate assessment of your situation, in that you guys were wondering, why are we being fired?
Well, I think so. Well, no, I think we were targeted. I think immigration judges and the court system is being targeted. So it's not collateral in a sense of trying to deport other people or immigration. It is calculated by very smart people who had 4 years to plan how to dismantle immigration. If you had a immigration court system, an independent immigration court system working, you would have immigration judges, enough of them, to have bond hearings to determine whether a person's a danger to the community and a flight risk, in a full and fair hearing, and issue a reasoned decision. And that person most likely, would probably have been released or not. You would have been able to hear a case within a certain time period. You would be able to either grant or deny cases. And so what you saw was, and so there's no way to have this mass deportation agenda without neutralizing or getting the immigration court system under control. So we were a check, I think, and I think that's one of the reasons. Why were you fired? Doing my job. I'm experienced. You have the ones that were not willing to just go along, and not to say people who are on the bench still are that, but there was an identification of certain judges, a lot of judges, if not all, that are going to, we're going to send a message. We're going to reshape this court in a different way. Which also made me, I thought, and then I just lost my train of thought. I would have wanted to go back as well, as to say, but yeah.
So thank you for being here. You're already an awesome storyteller.
I'm sorry, it's popped in my mind. I wanted to say, this other 1996 law on the militarization of the border. So now, if someone crossed the border before that, in the early 90s, they would cross the border, seasonal work, right, and then go home to their country and back and forth. You had the seasonal work program, and the undocumented population there was around 3 million, right? And then all of a sudden it balloons. Because why? The border is so tight and so difficult to cross. And there are penalties now. So if I'm in the United States without permission for over a year, I return to my home country, I'm now banned 10 years from ever crossing. And if I do cross undocumented, I'm facing federal time. So this was all placed in the law that now so it's not incentives to go return to your home country. And not to say that that was a correct and a just economic model, cultural model, social model. No, but what as attorneys at the time we would say, and up until now, if you want to remain in the United States, stay in the United States. And that the exploitation then was allowed, and that furthered it because of this one law that happened in '96. So that's why it just popped back in my head. So go ahead.
So a couple of weeks ago, my daughter and I were in Mexico City with my nephew, who's from Singapore. And we had this really interesting episode at the immigration at the airport. My nephew was allowed to go through, no questions. But the two of us, as United States citizens, were asked for return tickets, why we were there. And I tried to ask him if there were a lot of people moving into Mexico from the US, and didn't get a response. But I'm assuming both in Canada and Mexico there are people moving there. But that was very interesting to be asked to show proof of a return ticket. And so that was my comment. The question I have for you is, the months before you were fired, with all of the frustrating whiplash with different rules, changes to those rules, and back and forth, what made you stay instead of deciding to leave?
Yeah, it's the same reason people ask, would you go back? If I was offered, I filed a complaint, I want my job back, and I would. I'd probably get fired the next day for what I'm doing in there, but, I believed in what I was doing. And I know judges now, we talk about it. Why are you staying on the bench? And perhaps it's foolish, but people believe that they still are doing good things. And, what if I had left a week before, right? That last family, it's an easy case. Guatemala, indigenous, my mom, Ninth Circuit supports it here in San Francisco. But really, I don't know. Like, would I have been able to interact with that family? Would their case have been granted? Would they have, not granted or denied, would the next person have due process? And so there was a sense of service to the job. I woke up, extremely early, get to court. Like you push yourself. There's no reason to go and do the work, to spend the extra time through lunch and late and to turn yourself in and out, to hear these cases, to be that involved. You can simply just grant, deny, what. But the law meant that much to me to make sure, I read every motion that came through, and I think you're just doing it right. And, I liked my job. Our court was, up until the last day, I'm up there laughing with people. I found $1. I was like, I was listening to music in the morning. It was a great court. Frustrating, yes. But I think that we would be able to, and I still think we can change it, and it can go back. Or not back to the future. 80s.
Hi, I've got two questions for you. First one is, I understand that juveniles, unaccompanied minors facing immigration court used to have, like yesterday, had representation, and today they don't because of some canceled contracts or something that's going on. I wondered if there's just something general about unaccompanied minors that you might enlighten us about, and about fairness of the process, particularly around them. The second question is everything I hear about how CoreCivic is running the detention center in California City is leaving the United States open to all kinds of claims of civil rights violations. And I want to know who I sue now for leaving me on the hook for those awards that the people will be subject to later, to try to get CoreCivic to behave properly.
Right. I think you could probably sue CoreCivic. It'd probably be the easiest. This is not legal advice to anyone or an advocacy to sue CoreCivic, but CoreCivic and GEO groups are, the private prison companies. It's easier to sue a private entity than to sue the government. You run into all sorts of, trust me, I know jurisdictional issues about that. Money, detention, all of that. So lawyers will be suing, I'm sure. But for juveniles and children, that's what we're talking about. Immigration law is civil in nature. It's not criminal, even though we have these detention facilities, even though the detention is at times so unbearable that the person would rather face persecution and torture than to remain another day. Even though I talk to people who tell me, San Quentin, so much better than these places that immigration detention. It's just, it boggles the mind that's what detention is, for me at least. And it's a civil proceeding then. So it's civil, you're not entitled to an attorney. The law says you are entitled. Your due process is what Congress gives you. And Congress wrote in the statute, you have the right to counsel, but it's not going to be appointed, and the government's not going to pay for it. Now, these programs, these contracts, and I haven't read the news, and I'm not sure the exact thing. So what states have done, other organizations, you can have contracts, and then the feds give contracts to nonprofits to then represent minors because you couldn't certainly get a contract or a payment to represent everyone. Though some of the cities in the Bay Area, and I think New York as well, is trying to get universal representation. So what it means for private organizations will have to step up funding for these lawyers. The lawyers who do represent children in court, they're not high-paid, fancy lawyers and everything. These are people who are entered into immigration law under their convictions of wanting to represent children. And so it's disheartening to see us not provide basic attorneys. I think everyone in immigration proceedings should be appointed counsel. That's not really politically viable at this point, but certainly children should be. Certainly there was a lawsuit that required people who are not competent to have appointed counsel under certain circumstances, but that's really specific here. So people who are not competent, I think people detained, everyone who's detained should have an attorney. It's just another way of also not having these hearings, right? So if you don't have an attorney, how are you going to argue your case? How are you going to put forward your rights? Even more so if you're a child, how are you going to do that? It's very difficult. So there are amazing organizations who are trying to get that money back, and that is a difficult thing, working with kids in proceedings.
Hi, my name's Julie, and I wanted to say thank you for coming. It's been very informative. You mentioned that you have optimism and you have hope, and no offense, but you've kind of scared the bejesus out of me, and I'm feeling very depressed and unhopeful, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that hope.
Yeah.
And things we can do besides being kind to one another.
Right. I mean, we're in the
you.
Bay Area in Silicon Valley. There's a group of retired IP lawyers who've gotten together, and they're filing habeas corpus petitions, getting people out of jail, right? And I'm reviewing that. I'm part of a team. They're pro bono. So those and then they're sending photos of the family, of the dad who's reunited with their kid, right? And difficult things happen in this world, but that one dad with that kid, because these lawyers who are retired IP lawyers, and they had watching them work is amazing, because as a judge with very little resources or an immigration attorney, you don't have 4 sets of associates reviewing documents and drafting things. And they're doing amazing work just because, hey, I know how to federal litigate. So that is really amazing. Just yesterday, it's a mixed bag. I'm talking to this woman, and she's like, oh, I can't believe you remember my case. And I'm like, of course I remember your case, your family's case. And then I had to explain this. It's like her brother and sister were one of the first cases I heard, or I took as a young attorney. First time I was dealing with gang violence in Honduras, that's this family experience and things. One, and their case was denied, but one's still here, and then another person we reopened and got another grant for, so she's a lawful permanent resident. Her mother, I took that case, and she would have been ordered removed, and she was detained. I got her out of Florida, and then so she's now going to be a U.S. citizen, married, and so there's these families, there's these stories that are continuing on of hope and joy, and also the humanity, and the ones that don't, and I'm somewhat of a realist, but just that beauty, and there's going to be pain in life, and there's going to be difficulties, but that makes the joy that much better, and there are moments of joy out there. Young attorneys are doing amazing work. People are being released, and there are people who still come to the United States fearing violence, fearing persecution, and are granted relief. Those last days on the bench, I was second guessing myself. Am I wrong? Am I should I be denying asylum to everyone, right? I guess that's what we're supposed to do. But I had pinned up on my board in Chambers a letter from the asylum office. I was number 1 in my class. We had to go training and everything, and so I had high academic grades at asylum. I go, no, you're smart. You get it. You understand it. Keep doing what you're doing. Do what's right. So yeah, I have real hope out there because I see it in awards like the other day in Chicago. Judges who didn't know anything about immigration. Our president gave this banger of a speech. She always said, like, you had these people like, wow, this is what immigration's about. And maybe you were stripping some of that law stuff away and really getting into due process, that full and fair, not that academic, and those individual relationships. And one other story I'm just talking about. I had coffee in Mexico with this woman, and my Spanish is horrible. But we somehow understood this cafe was created to keep in response to immigration. At the time, the people were immigrating to the United States, and they made a roastery on the border so they could roast coffee there and sell it to the churches at a fair price, not Starbucks fair price. They were making money, and then in Chiapas, the families were staying at the farm, and so they had a living wage and stuff. And so they have this cafe, and I went there and had coffee and speaking to her. We're talking about the wall, and it's sad and violent, but we're also talking about mountain biking and running and all these things together. And I said later on that night, you know what? Maybe getting fired was worth it just to have coffee with that woman. Because that's how meaningful it was to me at that time to have coffee with her. It was really just two of us talking about sad things, right? The wall was right there, but also really amazing things like trail running in the mountains. That was right there too. This mountain was there. So our ability to have coffee together and talk was enough that I said, maybe this is why it's worth it to get fired, just to do that. That's what life and humanity really meant.
Yeah, sometimes bad luck turns out to be good luck. Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Grace Carter. I was an administrative judge of the Merit Systems Protection Board before I retired in 2023. So I have a particular interest in what you're talking about, and this notion that moving the administrative judge processes out of the executive and into an Article 1 type format is something that a former MSPB board member is now proposing as well.
Yeah.
And so I was curious that you mentioned that, but it also seemed to me that the immigration court was sending a message to administrative judges of every ilk. That is SSA judges, MSPB judges, SEC judges, all of whom over the last 10 years or so have been in a world where your judicial independence is challenged, where the notion of your following the due process that you're sort of trained to provide to parties is challenged in terms of efficiency, and never with a memo that says, oh, you must deny asylum in your case, but through other kinds of messaging. And how, as someone who at least formally was inside, how do we send that message? So there are so many cases now. Jackler is one, which from my perspective, the board is committing hara-kiri by suggesting that federal employees can be fired under Article 2 without notice and pass scrutiny. And so I would really, I know that might be very, in the weeds, but I would really like to hear your perspective on, those impacts on the federal workforce, which has over the last 18 months just been decimated in significant ways.
Absolutely. I mean, you're 100% correct. And we just filed an amicus in the Jackler brief, and it's, there's all of us are working on this issues. But I think the immigration space is unique in that I do think this is a test ground for this administration to see what they can get away with. And so you're pointing to these other administrative law judges and administrative law tribunals. They could be next. I'm 100%. The MSPB, the board is, it was fired. It was remade in the sense that, like, we lost the case because, there we were. So I do think that this is targeted to the immigration court system, and it's going to see if it works here, it can go to other courts. We've been a little quiet on that messaging, just because I'm not one to want to be a fearmonger to say, we're coming for you and stuff, but absolutely, it can happen. So I think you're 100% correct. And just another anecdote, when I was in Chicago, one of the judges was a tax court judge from DC, a tax law. And so I made sure I went up to him and spoke. I was like, so, are you independent? It's like, what's it like? And he's like, of course I'm independent. It's like, and he spoke with such a lightness. And this is a court that was already established under Article 1, away from the executive branch. And it may have been just him and me bantering, but it wasn't even a question in his mind about his independence. He's independent because we are. And now judges performing judicial functions, whether they're administrative or wherever they are, but they are still performing judicial functions. Having to question your independence kind of answers that question for you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question before we wrap up. Oh, and it's John.
I've had a lot of contact with the Latino community, and I've felt that fear. I know what's going on. I feel deeply about this. This is personal. And I'm just wondering, taking the long view, we'll be best off working like crazy to change the government in the next elections, even the midterm coming up. What do you see that there would be possibility of change? Would it take many years, or how long is this going to take?
No, wait. I think it can happen fairly quickly, right? Nonpartisan, non-political, vote your convictions. I think voting is incredibly important. I think speaking out is very important. I think it can happen fairly quickly. We saw how it was dismantled, very quickly. They had time to plan. There are people planning. There are people working on it. I think there needs to be a little bit more sharpness to it and a little bit more aggressiveness of it, even though if I'm not an aggressive type of person. But so I think it can happen fairly quickly. I think it just goes back to my optimism. It can, if Congress steps up, is in my opinion, is that Congress has been absent, and all around, not just immigration space. If Congress starts passing bills, working together and not fighting or whatever they do over there, but yeah.
I think you're going to find that's a great segue to what we're going to announce that we want people to do next week. But in the meantime, yes, wait till you hear. But in the meantime, Judge Johnson, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
I too want to thank you, and I want to thank Jane for bringing this program together. It was just really wonderful. We're so delighted that you could come all the way to Fremont.
All the way to Fremont, I know.
On BART.
On BART, yeah.
I want to, in addition to thanking our guests and our moderator today, I want to let you know that we're having two really terrific programs next week. Next Saturday, I don't know if Jim is going to show the slide.
Oh, yeah.
Nevertheless, I'm going to hold up this small flyer. Oh. The remote is up there. The remote is here.
There it is.
Oh, there. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Jeff. Okay. We're having two great programs next week. On Saturday, August 8th, it's the Unite and Rise event from the league. Our league is sponsoring this, and we're going to have a march around Lake Elizabeth in honor of voting rights and also in honor of the Voting Rights Act that was established in 1965. It's a celebration of the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. We're going to have a march around Lake Elizabeth. You can make your own signs. We're going to gather at 10 o'clock at a picnic table. It's called the Brook 2 Picnic Table. And the very next day at the Fremont Library, we're showing this fabulous film, John Lewis, Good Trouble. So both events are free. We really hope that you can come and bring your friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, just gather. And we also want to encourage you to please consider joining the League of Women Voters. Everybody can join, men and women, everybody can join. It's a fabulous organization, and there's a lot of work to be done, and we could use your help. So thank you very much, and again, thank you to our guests.
Thank you.